As we reach toward the next phase of human evolution, let us first consider the social and environmental circumstances that gave birth to the human species. In no way can we overlook the divine origins of creation or of the human person. But first we must consider biology, social development, and biological evolution. To begin, let us consider language. Tens of thousands of years ago, a variety of human species coexisted alongside one another. I'm sure that at times this was seemingly harmonious, but no doubt most of the time there was more likely an inclination towards competition and violence. That is only natural and not my focus here. The point is that most, if not all, of these species utilized language, and some may have even been more intelligent than us, Homo sapiens. However, that is still not the relevant point. Intelligence is important, but at the end of any evolutionary period, it is all about survival, finding food, and successfully reproducing. As evolution utilizes remarkably simple mechanisms, it nevertheless produces astonishingly complex results. Language is the first step in us, Homo sapiens, becoming the dominant species in this era. But no doubt, other varieties of human creatures certainly utilized language. It can be argued that if advanced cephalopods like the squid and octopus could pass on their learned problem-solving skills and acquired intelligence through some form of language, they could easily rise to the height of human accomplishment. However, the skills that one octopus learns remains almost completely isolated, and though it offers an advantage to one individual of that species, the problem-solving knowledge does not seem to be passed on in an efficient way to other members of the same species or to their posterity. So, intelligence does not necessarily point to any intrinsic value in regard to posterity. Language, however, does. Thus, we arrive at the first pillar of human flourishing. What we learn, skills and knowledge for survival and eventual thriving, for some, can be easily passed on to the generations that follow through spoken and eventually written language. Language connects us with one another, and it connects generations separated by far-reaching and even interminable periods of time. Language, and especially how it is used, points to pre-existing meaningful relationships across generations. Language points to a higher sense of communion. Still reflecting on the variety of human-like species that existed for tens of thousands of years alongside one another, I postulate that we all, or at least most of us, used language very well. I hypothesize that Neanderthal, Denisovan, Homo sapiens, and many other varieties quickly learned to use language with a particular and common two-step method. First, we created narratives to process trauma. Second, those stories quickly developed into what we recognize as institutions. Language is the foundation of all human institutions. Take the narrative regarding the Great Deluge, the Flood. A narrative cultivated in almost every ancient human society. Extreme weather events were certainly traumatic then, as they are now. Following these events, meaningful lessons were formed, and these lessons, communicated through language, quickly became institutions. Institutions of religion, education, society, government, science, the arts, and math. Passing on these institutions from generation to generation offered an advantage to the variety of human species that successfully implemented this evolutionary method and placed learning above simple instinct. Institutions became humanity's memory. However, language, and the institutions fostered by this ability, is next to pointless if it is assumed that the generations yet to be born do not hold meaning to those who possess current knowledge and desire to pass it down. They preserved the lessons learned through catastrophe so that every generation did not need to rediscover survival from the beginning. Institutions preserved the lessons acquired through traumatic events and contributed to not only our survival, but our ability to thrive and our ability to continue the advancement of our culture. Essentially, these early institutions of religion and culture allowed us, and many other human-like species, to scale up our intelligence and take on more complex problems for the sake of generations to come. The use of language reveals the value of posterity. Our drive to develop language serves and served us in the immediate era of its development, but its ultimate utility, or even its telos, be that divine predestination or random mutation, intends to give something special to the posterity of the founders of language itself. Language connects us on an invisible level, a supernatural dimension. Language builds community. It cultivates a higher act and practice of communion. However, with that idea being established, it will be more useful to pick this up after exploring some other ideas and further dissecting the ethos of institutions. There's another pillar, another cause, which lead to Homo sapiens in particular taking the full reins and outcompeting the other varieties of human-like species. It is our restless nature, our constant challenging of the status quo, present in Homo sapiens to a radical degree, allowed us to do something that the other human-like species could not even fathom. Rebel against the institutions that once saved us, that once preserved us through traumatic events. Though it is difficult to prove, it does seem to fit the scheme. Species like Neanderthal and Denisovan, who apparently had very complex cultures and most likely used language effectively, seemed stubborn and essentially stuck in their ways. After all, rebelling against established institutions that developed as a survival tool and even foster prosperity in some generations seems like social suicide. Who would willingly challenge institutions of law and agriculture, of war and peace, of theology and science, when these institutions gave birth to the first age's prosperity? It would take a creature who is naturally overwhelmed by a sense of restlessness to impose anarchy on the established order. Enter the modern human. As Neanderthal and Denisovan were obedient even unto extinction, Homo sapiens were not. The fact is simple. The environment changes. Circumstances change. The ecosystem adapts with the rise and fall of every food source. Our world changes as every season passes. It changes as a result of geology, climate, evolving coastlines, drifting continents, and astronomical events. With the impact of early agriculture and every economic and industrial revolution. Indeed, it is as Heraclitus of Ephesus stated, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man," highlighting the constant state of change in both life and identity. All is in flux. The only true constant is change itself. Whether or not we learn this or know it through dominating instincts is beside the point. We were the ones that did it. The institution of agriculture, or of hunting and gathering, creates the perfect example. If for generations a human community survived utilizing the same methodology, it would come to a time that the environment would be so different that some random or possibly predestined generation would have to challenge and alter the former institutions to survive and thrive. It is likely that the older generation was reluctant to change while some force, allowed the younger generation to see the need for change. That observation is just a hunch, however, and based completely on the anecdotal evidence I have observed since my childhood. Kids, teenagers, and young adults seem to harbor the greatest amount of restlessness. Their spirit, their mindset, be that a random evolutionary mutation, an instinct, or divine charism is wired to easily express any and all restlessness. So, what is the true process involved in altering an established institution? Rebellion. A just society, an advanced and comfortable civilization, is the product of both obedience and rebellion. This is facilitated by language. Language, obedience, and rebellion. But that is only half the story. Furthermore, this process is dependent on the inclusion of posterity and their inclusion in a universal application of dignity, rights, opportunity, knowledge, and, most importantly, the fundamental opportunity to exist. In the end, our true niche is not language, as many human species developed and practiced this exercise, nor is it complete obedience, because that would eventually lead to extinction, but our niche is not solely rebellion either. All of these qualities, language, obedience, and rebellion, regardless of any notions of divine design or random mutation, have fostered something else that is truly useful and meaningful. Our niche is found in our ability to cultivate an ethos of communion across our species, across our planet's various ecosystems, and across generations. This type of communion is fostered by both obedience and rebellion, both of which are facilitated by language. Beyond the visible elements and visible members of community, the communion needed to facilitate our continued becoming includes both the visible and the yet-to-be visible, while always keeping in mind that the yet-to-be visible are needed for our further progress as a species, and they have utility even in the age of their non-existence. The use of language itself points to the value and dignity of all posterity to come. Otherwise, language itself carries no intrinsic long-term value. Though they're yet to be born, their value should already be known as we are creating stories for them. Stories that become institutions. Institutions that foster eventual prosperity and rebellions that perfect those institutions. And all of this seemingly for the sake of communion. Though they are yet to be born, our flawed institutions need them to escape our ignorance of institutional flaws and continue down the path of perfection. Though they are yet to be born, language already hints of their need for us to recognize them. Any properly aligned teleological understanding should recognize this. Obedience to institutions and rebellion against them is essentially good as long as such processes serve the needs of communion, which ultimately surpasses the ethos and needs of the older generation and demands the radical inclusion of all generations to come. The dignity and value of posterity is relational before it is functional. And due to this quality, that inevitably boils over during the course of human life and the progress of any given civilization, we must recognize the need for rebellion and the fact that rebellion is best practiced by our posterity.